I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest. There isn't a single soul left in this galaxy who admits they cheered that day. Ask them now, ask any of them. You'll get the same soft answer, the same downward flick of the eyes, the same careful little lie. We had concerns. We voted with caution. We only wanted safety. I was there, I heard the cheering. I heard it roll up the tiers of the great hall like water finding a drain, thousands of voices, hundreds of species, all of them louder than they had any right to be. I heard it because I was standing 3 steps below the human envoy when the vote came down, close enough to watch her hands. She didn't clench them. That's the part I've never been able to forget. Everyone expected her to clench them, to shake, to shout. She just laid them flat on the rail in front of her, and looked out at all of us like she was memorizing our faces. I've told this story maybe 100 times since. Every time someone stops me right here and says, "But surely it wasn't that simple. Surely there were reasons." There were reasons. There are always reasons. That's what makes it worse. Let me start where it starts. My name is Ohan Vale. In your terms I would be something like a translator, though that word is too small. Among the Sethri we are called voice keepers, and it means what it sounds like. We carry the words of one people into the mouths of another, and we're supposed to carry the weight of those words too. I was young then, only 240 of your years, which for my kind is barely an adult. I had been assigned to the human delegation, because no one else wanted the posting. You have to picture what the galaxy looked like in those days, or none of this will land the way it should. We called ourselves the Loom, 11,000 years old that union, 91 member species woven together, every thread supposedly holding up every other thread. That was the whole idea, that was the poetry of it. We had a saying, cut one strand and the cloth remembers. We put it on our currency. We carved it over the doors of our courts. We believed it the way you believe your own heartbeat without ever really listening to it. The Loom's heart was a station called Saravast. Not a planet, a station, though calling it a station is like calling an ocean a puddle. It hung in the dark between 4 suns, a ring of pale metal and grown crystal wide enough that light took most of an hour to cross it. 9 million permanent residents, docking spires that reached out like the fingers of something praying. And in the center, the great hall where the convocation met, where the votes were cast, where the fate of species got decided by beings who had never once set foot on the worlds they were deciding for. I lived on the 41st tier. My window looked out at the machines. I should tell you about the machines because you don't have anything like them and I don't want you imagining wrong. We didn't build tools the way you'd think of building. We grew them, half alive, out of crystal seeded with old memory. The docking cranes breathed. The transit rails healed themselves when they cracked. Above the hall floated the arbiter, a lattice of white light the size of a small moon, the collective processing mind of the entire Loom, 11,000 years of law and precedent humming in a shape too big to look at directly. When the arbiter spoke, the whole station felt it in its bones. That was the galaxy humanity walked into. They came late. That's important. By the time the first human ship limped up to Saravast's outer ring, the Loom had been running its beautiful 11,000-year machine without them, and the machine did not like new threads. I remember the day they docked. I was sent down to the receiving spire as junior voice keeper, mostly to observe. The senior delegates thought it beneath them. There was a betting pool going. Honestly, half the diplomats were wagering on how long the humans would last before the Loom found some polite reason to send them home. Nobody expected much. Their ship was ugly. I mean that plainly. It was blunt and scorched and patched in a dozen places with plating that didn't match, and it had crossed the deep dark on engines we'd retired 8,000 years earlier, engines so primitive it made some of the older delegates laugh out loud. I didn't laugh. I watched that ugly ship line itself up against a docking spire built for vessels 100 times its size, and I watched it do it without a single tug or guide beam by hand, and I remember thinking, they came all this way on that. Not with our jumplatises, not with grown engines. On fire and stubbornness and math, they'd worked out themselves in the dark. The hatch opened, and out came the woman I told you about. Her name was Mara Coyle. She wasn't tall for a human, I learned later, average maybe, but she had a way of standing that made the spire feel smaller. Dark skin, close-cropped hair going gray at the temples, a plain gray uniform with no ornament except a single black band on the sleeve. No crown, no robes, no entourage of 100 like our delegates traveled with. 6 people came off that ship behind her. 6. I stepped forward to do my job, to carry her first words into the ears of the receiving council, and she looked at me, and before I could speak she spoke first, in halting, terrible, self-taught loom standard. "We came," she said, "to learn how you did it, how you held so many together for so long. We'd like to help hold it if you'll have us." I have carried a great many first words across a great many thresholds. I have never carried better ones. I translated them perfectly, and I watched the receiving council smile, the small, patient, poisonous smile of people who had already decided you were beneath them, and I felt the first cold drop of something I couldn't name yet. It would be 4 years before I had a name for it. The name was shame. Let me be fair to my own people. Let me be fair to all of us, because if I only tell you the parts that make humanity shine and the loom look wicked, then I'm doing exactly what the propagandists did, just in the other direction, and I promised myself a long time ago I'd never do that. The humans were difficult. They were, I won't pretend otherwise, they argued. Ancestors, how they argued. In the loom, a proposal moved through 9 committees over the course of a decade, each species weighing in, each amendment considered by the arbiter, everything slow and smooth and inevitable. That was the loom's great pride. Nothing happened fast enough to be a mistake. The humans hated it. Coyle's people would sit in those committees and ask questions no one had asked in 1,000 years. Why is it done this way? Who does this actually protect? What happens to the people on the border worlds while we deliberate for a decade? They pointed at things everyone had agreed not to point at. There was a whole class of loom worlds, outer worlds, poor worlds, worlds full of species who joined too late to get good seats. That quietly went without. That got the last of the resources and the least of the protection, and everyone knew, and everyone had a soft, comfortable reason not to look. The humans looked. I was in the chamber the day Coyle stood up during a resource allocation session and said, plainly, to the entire convocation, that 4 border worlds were going to run out of medical grafts within the year, and the loom's own schedule wouldn't deliver more for 8. She had the numbers. She'd gone and gotten the numbers herself, flown out there in that ugly ship, walked those wards, counted the beds. The chamber went very quiet. And then the delegate from the Walloon, old species, powerful species, one of the founding threads, said the thing that I think of as the true beginning of the end. He didn't argue with her numbers. He said, in that smooth Walloon purr, "The schedule exists for a reason, envoy. If we bend it for 4 worlds, we bend it for 400. The cloth holds because the weave is patient. You have not been here long enough to understand patience." And Coyle looked at him and she said, "People are dying on the schedule. I understand the schedule fine. I don't understand how you sleep." You could have heard a feather fall. I want to tell you the convocation was moved. I want to tell you that was the moment we all woke up. It wasn't. What actually happened is that the humans won that one vote barely, by the narrowest margin in a century, and the grafts went out, and 4 worlds lived that would have died. And the loom never forgave them for it. That's the thing you have to understand about old and comfortable power. It doesn't hate you for being wrong. It hates you for being right in a way that makes it look small. Every world humanity saved was a quiet accusation. Every schedule they broke was a mirror held up to 11,000 years of we could have, but we chose comfort instead. The humans didn't know they were doing it. That's the tragedy. They thought they were just helping. They thought if they showed up and worked hard and were useful and kind, the loom would love them for it, the way you love someone who makes your house better. They didn't understand, yet, that they were the strand the cloth had decided to cut. The campaign against them was patient. Everything in the loom was patient. It started with words. It always starts with words. I'm a voice keeper. All beings know how a thing gets killed with words long before anyone raises a hand. First, the humans were difficult. Then they were destabilizing. Then they were a risk to the weave. Each word a little heavier than the last, each one repeated in 1,000 mouths until it stopped sounding like an opinion and started sounding like a fact. They dug up humanity's history. This was the clever part, I'll give them that. The loom sent quiet ships to Earth's archives. The humans, being new and trusting and eager to be liked, had handed over their full history, all of it, the way you'd show a new friend your whole life so they'd know you had nothing to hide. Big mistake. Because human history is a war. You know this better than I do. 10,000 years of it. Species that clawed its way up out of mud and ice, that turned on itself again and again, that built weapons that could crack a world open and then somehow chose not to use them, chose to climb down off that ledge and reach for the stars instead. To me, to anyone who looked honestly, that history was a miracle. Here was a people who had every reason to destroy themselves and didn't, who saw the abyss and turned around. The loom did not present it as a miracle. They took every war, every atrocity, every dark hour of humanity's long climb, and they laid it out before the convocation like evidence at a trial. Look what they are. Look what they've done to each other. And you would weave them into us. You would trust them at the loom with the shuttle in their hand. They didn't mention that every species in that chamber had its own dark hours. The Valoon had burned 3 of their own colonies to ash in a purity war 8,000 years back. The Sethri, my own people, had done things in our early history I won't repeat here. But those were old sins, sanded smooth by time, forgiven and forgotten and left out of the record. Humanity's sins were fresh, and worse, they were honest. The humans hadn't hidden any of it, hadn't pretended, and so it was all right there to be used. I tried to say something. Once. I stood up in a lower committee. I had no real standing. I was only a voice keeper. And I said that if we were going to judge species by their worst days, none of us would survive the judgment. I said humanity's history wasn't a warning. It was a testament. I said any people that could hold that much darkness and still choose the light was exactly the kind of thread the loom should want. I was thanked for my perspective. I was reminded of my station. I was not invited back to that committee. The vote came in the 4th year. I need to slow down here, because this is the part I've never gotten right in the retelling, and I want to get it right for once. The morning of the vote, Coyle asked to see me. Not a formal request. She just sent word through one of her 6 that if the junior Sethri voicekeeper had a moment, she'd appreciate it. I went. Of course I went. Her quarters were on the 90th tier, the low tiers, the poor tiers, where they'd put the humans deliberately, far from the center, far from the power. A long way down from where I lived, and I lived nowhere near the top. Her room was small and bare. She'd been given the standard loom quarters, all that grown crystal and shifting light, and she'd covered most of it. Cloth over the walls. Hard-printed images pinned up, faces, places. A blue world scene from orbit that I understood, after a moment, was Earth. A cup of something dark and steaming that she didn't offer me because she knew it would poison me, but she held it in both hands like it was keeping her warm. "They're going to vote us out today," she said. "Not a question." "The count is close," I said. "It wasn't. We both knew it wasn't, but I'm a voice keeper. I couldn't help softening it." She smiled at that, tired, kind. "You don't have to do that with me, Ohin. I've been counting votes my whole life. I know how this ends." I didn't have anything to say, so I said the true thing, which is usually the only thing worth saying when you've got nothing else. I said, "I'm sorry, I tried. It wasn't enough." And she put down her cup, and she looked at me with those steady dark eyes, and she said something I have carried every single day since. She said, "Don't be sorry you saw us. That's more than most. When this is over and everyone's telling it their own way, you remember that you saw us clearly and you didn't look away. That matters. Even if it doesn't change anything today, it matters that somebody saw." Then she asked me a question. She asked, "Oh Hen, when we're gone and something comes that you can't handle, and it always does, will the loom remember that it cut us out? Or will it tell itself a story where this was somebody else's fault?" I didn't answer, I couldn't, because I already knew. She nodded like I had answered. "Yeah," she said. "That's what I figured." And then she stood up, straightened her plain gray uniform, and went to be cast out of the galaxy with her head up. The Great Hall on the day of the vote was the fullest I ever saw it. Every tier packed, every species present. The arbiter above, that vast lattice of white light, humming so deep you felt it behind your eyes. And down on the central floor, alone, they hadn't even given her a chair, that's how it was done. A species on trial stood on the bare floor while the seated judged them stood Mara Coyle and her six. The charges were read. I won't repeat them all. You know the shape of them by now: destabilizing influence, incompatible history, risk to the weave. Dressed up in the old formal language, every ugly thing wrapped in 11,000 years of beautiful words. Coyle was given the right to respond. Every condemned species is. It's one of the old courtesies, you may speak before we cut you. She spoke for a long time. She was good. Ancestors, she was good, and I say that as someone whose entire life is words. She didn't beg. That's what nobody expected and nobody's forgiven her for, because when you cast someone out and they beg, you get to feel merciful, you get to feel powerful, you get to feel like the parent forgiving the child. When they don't beg, when they just stand there and tell you the plain truth, you're left holding nothing but what you actually are. She told the loom it was afraid. She told it that it had confused patience with cowardice a long time ago, and comfort with wisdom, and that somewhere in 11,000 years it had stopped being a living thing that grew and become a beautiful dead thing that only pretended to. She said humanity had come to help hold the cloth, and the cloth had decided it would rather unravel slowly in the dark than let a new thread show it how to be strong. And then she said the last thing. And this is where the cheering started, because the powerful in that room heard it as a threat, and there is nothing the powerful love more than a threat from the weak, because it lets them feel justified. She said, "You're not casting out a danger, you're casting out your own last chance." And the terrible thing, the thing I'm actually sorry for, is that I don't think you'll understand that until you're standing in the dark screaming for someone to come, and you'll look up, and the only ones close enough to hear you will be the ones you threw away. I hope you're kinder to us then than you were today. We'll try to be kinder to you than you deserve. That's the difference between us. That's the difference you never bothered to see. The Walloon delegate called the vote. The arbiter counted. That great mind of white light counted 11,000 years of law and precedent and fear, and it rendered the number, and the number cast humanity out of the loom. And the hall cheered. I stood 3 steps below her and I did not cheer, and I watched her lay her hands flat on nothing, on the empty air where a rail would have been if they'd given her one, and I watched her memorize our faces. Then she turned, and she walked out of the great hall of Saravast with her 6 behind her, and none of them ran, and none of them wept, and the ugly ship that had crossed the deep dark on fire and stubbornness lifted off the poor low spire they docked it at, and it turned its blunt scorched nose toward the black, and it went home. We put a blockade around Earth's system after that. Did you know? That was the part they didn't cheer, because it was ugly and small and everyone knew it. A ring of grown warships around the human star, not to attack. The loom told itself it wasn't an attack, but to contain. To make sure the danger stayed in its box. To make sure that history the humans were so honest about never got a chance to spread. They put a wall around the only people who'd offered to help. And the loom went back to its beautiful, patient, dead machine, and it told itself it had been wise, and for a little while it believed it. For a little while. I want to tell you about the day the hollow tide came, but I can't yet, because you won't feel it right unless you understand how good things were first, how safe we felt, how completely we'd already forgotten. 11 years passed. 11 years, and humanity became a story we told our young to explain why the loom's borders were closed on the coreward edge. There were once a people so dangerous we had to wall them away. The blockade held. Nothing came out of Earth's system, no ships, no signals, no trouble. Some took that as proof the humans had given up, gone back to their mud, learned their place. A few of us, quieter, wondered what a people like that were doing in there, behind the wall, all those years, with all that stubbornness and no one to help. I never stopped wondering. I kept Coyle's last words folded up inside me like a document I couldn't stop rereading. The only ones close enough to hear you will be the ones you threw away. I got old in Sethry terms. I got promoted, finally, senior voicekeeper, a good posting on the 40th tier now, one up from where I'd started. I told myself I'd made peace with it. I told myself a lot of things. And then the coreward stations went silent. It started small. It always starts small. A relay outpost on the far coreward rim missed its scheduled report. Then a mining world stopped answering. Then a whole cluster, 9 populated worlds, 40 million souls, went dark inside a single day. And the ships we sent to check on them didn't come back either. And the ships we sent after those ships sent one last signal before they went dark too, and the signal was 3 words. It eats light. That's the first anyone in the loom heard of the hollow tide. I was in the Great Hall when the Arbiter delivered its assessment. Same hall where they'd cast Coyle out. Same tiers, mostly the same faces, 11 years older and a great deal less certain. The Arbiter's voice filled the room, and for the first time in my long life, that ancient mind of white light sounded, I don't have a better word, afraid. It showed us what the tide was. You have to understand, we had encyclopedias of horror. 11,000 years, 91 species, we'd seen plagues and warlords and dying stars. We had a category for everything. We had no category for the hollow tide. It wasn't a fleet, it wasn't an army. It was closer to a weather, a spreading front of something the Arbiter could barely model, a darkness that moved through space consuming the energy of everything it touched. Stars dimmed as it passed. Reactors died. The grown engines of our ships, all that living crystal, simply stopped, went cold, went still, because whatever the tide was, it drank the life out of anything that ran on light or memory or growth, and everything the loom had ever built ran on exactly those 3 things. Our entire civilization, 11,000 years of it, grown, not built, alive, not machined, and here came a thing that ate the alive parts and left the dead metal drifting. The Arbiter calculated the tide's course. It ran the projection right there in the center of the hall, a great slow map of the galaxy with a stain spreading across it, and every soul in that chamber watched the stain reach toward Saravast, toward the coreward worlds, toward all of us, and the Arbiter gave us a number. 230 days, give or take. 230 days until the hollow tide reached the heart of the loom, and there was not one thing in 11,000 years of our beautiful patient wisdom that could stop it, because everything we had built to be strong had been built to be alive, and the tide killed living things first. The hall did not cheer that day. The hall was silent, and then the hall was screaming, and I stood on my tier and I heard, underneath the screaming, so quiet that maybe I was the only one who heard it. I heard Mara Coyle's voice, from 11 years gone. You'll be standing in the dark screaming for someone to come. I'll tell you how the idea got raised, because I was the one who raised it, and I've never been sure if I should be proud of that or ashamed. The convocation met in emergency session, over and over, for 40 days. 40 days of the best minds of 91 species throwing everything they had at the problem, and the problem eating it all. We tried weapons, the tide had nothing to shoot. We tried walls, it went through them. Or rather it drank them, the grown barriers dying at its touch. We tried evacuation, and discovered there was nowhere to evacuate to, because the tide moved faster than any fleet, and it was spreading in every direction at once, a stain with no clean edge to run from. On the 40th day, in a lower committee, I'd earned a seat in the lower committees by then, senior voice keeper. They had to let me in. I stood up. My legs were shaking. I remember that. 250 years old and my legs shaking like a youngling's. I said, there is one people in this galaxy who don't build the way we build. I let it sit. Ancestors, I let it sit, because I knew what I was about to say, and I knew what it would cost me, and I said it anyway, because Mara Coyle had asked me to see clearly and not look away, and this was the moment. This was the whole reason she'd made me carry those words for 11 years. I said, humanity builds dead things, metal and fire and math. Their ugly ship crossed the deep dark on engines we retired 8,000 years ago, engines that don't run on light or growth or memory, engines the tide can't drink. We cast them out because their history was full of war. My friends, we are about to learn what a people who spent 10,000 years at war might know about surviving a thing that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be soothed, cannot be waited out. We built a civilization that dies the instant something eats the light. They built one that was already used to the dark. I said, we cut the strand, and now the cloth is coming apart exactly as they said it would. There is still time to go to the ones we threw away and ask and hope they are kinder than we were. The committee was silent for a long time. And then the arguing started, and it was ugly, and I won't pretend it wasn't. There were delegates in that room who would rather have died, who said out loud they would rather the whole loom died than go begging to humanity. There is a particular kind of pride the pride of the powerful who were wrong, and it is the deadliest force in any galaxy, deadlier than any tide, because it will burn down the whole house rather than admit the door it locked was the one with help behind it. The debate went all the way up to the convocation, all the way up to the full hall. It took 11 days, 11 of our 230, spent arguing about whether we were even allowed to be saved. In the end, it wasn't wisdom that won. I want to be honest with you. It wasn't a great awakening. It wasn't the loom seeing the light. It was fear, plain animal fear, the fear of 40 million dead coreward souls and the stain crawling closer every day. Fear did what wisdom couldn't. The convocation voted narrowly, the way every important thing was always voted, narrowly, to send an envoy to Earth. To lift the blockade we'd built around them 11 years before. To go, hat in hand, to the people we'd cast out, and ask them to come save the galaxy that had thrown them away. And when the convocation asked who would carry those words, who would stand before humanity and speak for the loom that had wronged them, the hall went quiet, because it is one thing to vote for a humiliation and another thing to be the one who wears it. I stood up. Of course I stood up. I'd been standing up for these people for 11 years. Why stop now? I'll go, I said. I knew them. I saw them clearly once and I didn't look away. Let me carry the words. If anyone in the loom has the right to ask them for mercy, it's the one who told them we didn't deserve it and turned out to be right. They let me go. I think honestly they were relieved. If I failed, if the humans killed me or turned me away, it wouldn't be the convocation's shame. It would just be old Ohan Vale, the eccentric Sethri who'd always been too fond of the humans, getting what he deserved. They pinned the whole weight of it on me and called it an honor. I didn't care. I'd have carried it for nothing. I'd have carried it barefoot across the dark. Because I was going to see them again. After 11 years, I was going to cross the blockade and land on that blue world I'd only ever seen pinned to the wall of a small bare room. and I was going to find out what a cast-out people had become in the dark, while the rest of us slept safe and stupid behind our beautiful dying walls. The ship they gave me was fast and beautiful and grown, which meant it was useless anywhere near the tide, but the tide wasn't between us and Earth, not yet. So it carried me coreward and then spinward and then out toward the edge where humanity's lonely star burned. The blockade was still there. 11 years and we'd never stood it down. Grown warships in a ring, patient and silent, walling in a people who'd never once tried to break out. I sent the codes ahead, told them who I was, told them why I'd come, braced myself for silence, for refusal, for a loom warship captain refusing to let me pass out of 11 years of habit. The blockade opened without a word, and a human voice, young, flat, professional, came across my channel and said only, "You're cleared to the surface, voice keeper. They're expecting you. Been expecting you for a while, honestly. Been expecting you for a while." I didn't understand what that meant until I broke atmosphere over Earth and looked down and saw. I'm going to have to stop here at the edge of it, because what I saw when I came down through the clouds over that blue world deserves its own telling, and I won't rush it. But I'll give you this much, so you know where we're standing. I had come expecting to find survivors. A people huddled behind a wall, making do, nursing 11 years of grief, maybe 11 years of hatred. I had rehearsed my apology 1,000 times on the journey. I had prepared myself to grovel. I came down through the clouds, and I saw a shipyard that stretched from one horizon to the other. I saw hulls, thousands of them, blunt and scorched and armored, dead metal and cold fire, engines that ran on nothing the tide could drink, being built by the light of 100,000 welding fires that turned the night side of the planet gold. I saw a fleet that had no business existing, that 11 years of a walled-in people should never have been able to build unless they had known. Unless someone had looked at the shape of the galaxy the day they were cast out and understood, the way you understand a coming storm by the color of the sky, that the loom's beautiful living civilization had a fatal flaw, and that one day something would come that only the dead metal, cold fire, stubborn in the dark people could stand against. Unless they'd spent 11 years not grieving, not hating, building. And as my grown ship set down at the edge of that impossible shipyard, small and beautiful and useless among all that ugly, deathless iron, a figure walked out to meet me across the tarmac. Gray uniform, one black band on the sleeve, close-cropped hair gone fully white now, at the temples and everywhere else. Older, so much older. But standing the way she'd always stood, the way that made the biggest room feel small. Mara Coyle looked at me across 11 years and a galaxy's worth of shame, and she didn't smile, and she didn't gloat, and she said, in loom standard that had gotten a great deal better, "Hello, Ohin, you saw us clearly once, I never forgot that." She looked past me, up at the sky coreward, toward the stain none of us could see yet but all of us could feel coming. "So," she said, "it came, just like I said it would." "It came," I told her, my voice broke on it. "Mara, I'm so sorry, the loom I've come to ask." "I know what you've come to ask." She put a hand on my shoulder. Human hands are warm, I'd forgotten that. "We've been ready for 3 years, ships are fueled, crews are trained. We've been waiting on the wall to come down." She tilted her head, and there, finally, was the smallest, saddest ghost of a smile. "You want to know the difference between us and the loom, Ohin. You spent 11 years telling yourselves you'd been wise. We spent 11 years getting ready to come save you anyway." She turned toward the shipyard, toward all that waiting iron, and she said the last thing before we walked into it together. And it's the line I want to leave you on because I've never found a better one, and I've been telling this story a long time. She said, "They cast us out to keep the galaxy safe, and now the only thing that can keep the galaxy safe is us. Come on, old friend. Let's go show them what humanity does with the people who threw it away." We save them anyway.